Hillary, as you know, slamming Southern California over the weekend, the first tropical storm to hit the area in more than 80 years.
The state's latest snow survey confirms a blockbuster year for snow in the Sierra.
If you live in California, these seemingly contradictory headlines have been a familiar sight. But what exactly is going on? California has always had a variable climate. In fact, when it comes to precipitation, California has the most variable climate in the entire U.S. However, climate change is making these flips from drought to deluge more intense. Dry periods are hotter and drier, and wet periods often dump more rain in a shorter period of time. So what does this mean for California? Our water supply system was designed for mid-20th century conditions, when temperatures were lower and precipitation, snowpack, and runoff more reliable. Over the last 2 decades, warming, an increasingly thirsty atmosphere, and losses in snowpack are stressing the system like never before. Increasingly severe droughts are not the only problem facing the state. During drought, it's easy to forget that California also experiences wet years and occasionally very large damaging floods. In fact, 1 in 5 Californians live in areas at risk of flooding. Climate projections show a steady increase in the intensity of atmospheric rivers, or flood-generating storms, in the coming years. While this is great for water supply, it increases the risk of severe, life-threatening floods. These changes are posing widespread challenges for our businesses, communities, and ecosystems, and often hit low-income communities the hardest. Managing for drought and flood simultaneously has to become part of California's DNA. This will involve significant investment in our flood control systems and putting as much water in the ground as we can during rainy periods. This past wet season alone, we recharged enough groundwater to supply 11 million homes for a year. This is a good start, but much more is needed. Innovation in managing floods and water storage together will be key to adapting to our increasingly volatile climate.
Good morning, everybody. Ask you all to take your seats, please. We're going to get started. My name is Ellen Hanak. I'm a senior fellow here at the PPIC Water Policy Center, and I just want to say giant welcome to everybody in the room and to everybody who's online. We're very excited about this program today and the chance to share it all with you, and very excited to welcome a great set of leaders from the local, state, and federal level to the stage to talk with us and to talk with you all. And a lot of you were chatting during the beautiful film that was just up on the screen, but I just want to recommend it to you because basically that summarizes everything we're going to do in the next 3.5 hours. And it's a beautiful short film about sort of our crazy volatile weather with drier dries and wetter wets, and was done by our colleague Ashlyn Perry, and it's available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So it's a nice thing some of you may want to share in your networks. I want to now just tell you a little bit about, just for those of you who don't know PPIC, or just a reminder about us. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit policy research institute. I'm going to read this to make sure I get all the words right. And we have offices in San Francisco and Sacramento. And as a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. So sometimes we make recommendations based on our research, and you're going to hear recommendations probably from folks on the stage. And that's just to serve the better interests of getting folks together to make good policy decisions for California. At the Water Policy Center, we are especially interested in all things related to water, and our mission is to connect objective research and data with real world water management challenges. And this is really aiming to be for the benefit of California's communities, California's economy, and our ecosystems across the state. So now I'd like to just take a moment to thank our wonderful family of annual sponsors who supported today's event, as well as the policy brief, Priorities for California's Water, Stewarding the Wet Years. You have some copies on your table of that, and I'll tell you in a minute how you can get it online as well. This is a chance for us every year to take a look at the water year that was and to gather information and analysis on some of the top priorities going into the coming policy year. And so here we're really focusing on the wet year that we just had experienced and looking both at the supply issues and the flood management issues. And I also want to take a moment to welcome our new director of the Water Center, Letitia Grenier, who's here with us. And we're super excited to have her. She just joined in late September, and you're gonna get to hear from her in the third panel, which she's gonna be moderating. And so if you like what you see, or if you like what we do, please consider joining us as an annual sponsor at the organizational level, or as a donor at the individual level, because that helps us make events like this and our work more generally possible. So now just a few copies of the priorities report are on your tables. There's also a QR code on your table that you can scan to get the agenda and the bios of the panelists. We're not going to spend a lot of time introducing them, just in the interest of time. And you can also find more of our publications at the publications table in the lobby out back there. So now just a quick overview of the agenda for today. We've got a packed schedule. I'm going to give you first a short overview of some of the takeaways from this latest policy brief, and some of the takeaways that we came to from that as a tee up to three really great panel discussions. The first one is going to be looking at managing floods, doing a better job of preparing for the floods, the kind of floods that we're facing and expected to face. Second panel is going to look at doing a better job at storing water, harnessing the wet years to get better through the dry. And then we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and have a third panel that's really kind of looking at pulling it all together with several leaders who have a broad view of these issues at the state level, and what policies could help. And then at the end of the formal program, we're going to break and have lunch and invite you all to stay and network and just enjoy some breaking bread together. We will have at the last part of each of the panels, there'll be a chance for audience questions. And so for those folks in the room, just raise your hand. We'll have colleagues who are going to go around with mics. They'll hold it for you, so you can get your question in, and we can have the panel take a shot at answering it for you. And then for our virtual attendees, we also want to make it available to you to ask questions. So to do that, please pop an email with your question to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Also say who you are, and we'll try to get in as many of those questions as possible as well. And a few more housekeeping items before I start with the overview presentation. The policy brief and the slides are also available on our website on the event page, so you can download them. The event videos will be posted pretty soon to our website, and we'll also have a blog post that comes out probably early next week that kind of summarizes this and has links, so that's really nice for sharing with folks who you think might enjoy it, who didn't have a chance to make it. And later today, you will receive an email with a short survey just asking you a little bit about your experience with the event and how we did. That's so helpful to us, so if you get it, please just take a few minutes and fill it out. We really appreciate that. Okay, so, oh yeah, restrooms upstairs to my left. There you go. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to a little overview of, let's see, okay, you've got the slides. So this is a quick overview of the little policy brief that we've prepared, and this year's focusing on the wet year that we had and what that means, sort of what lessons, it's always great to have extreme weather in a way because it allows us to sort of test our systems and see how we're doing. So this was a good example of that this past year. So we wanted to get a sense of it. We were looking at the data and tracking, sort of what was happening, what was evolving in the policy space and tracking the news, but we also wanted to get input on this. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that there were a lot of folks that helped us. We held a number of focus group conversations with managers, experts, folks on the ground from across the state, managing the supply side, managing the flood side, managing issues related to low-income communities, managing issues related to the environment. And so I want to acknowledge all of you who helped. You know who you are. Thanks very much. Our blog also this year featured a lot of interviews with folks who were dealing with these issues. So that's a pretty rich source too. And you'll see little pull-out quotes in the brief that are from some of those interviews. So it was a crazy year. And if you think our weather's getting crazier, the data agree with you. So I just want to start by giving you a little overview of that. This is from a really nice blog post that my colleagues Jeff Mount and Gokcha Senjan and Mike Dettinger pulled together, kind of summarizing the water year the 2023 water year. And the first picture here tells you that these are dots that show sort of annual statewide levels of precipitation. It's volatile. It's always been somewhat volatile. We sometimes feel like it's getting much drier lately, and we go through swings. But on average, what that line is telling you is that there's not been really any trend in average precipitation over time. So average precipitation has not changed, but you're not wrong if you think things are getting crazier, because we're not getting as many sort of normal or near normal years as we used to. What these green dots on the screen show you years that are within one standard deviation, so half a standard deviation on either side of that average. And you can see that up to, for the first 80 years of the last century, so from 1900 to 1979, on average, 38%. So more than a third of our years were sort of near normal, with kind of the balance on either end of drier, wetter. Now, since 1980, that shaded area, it's only about 20%. So that's a big shift. So what is sort of going along with that is that volatility is on the rise. So this now shows you, instead of just the average amount of precipitation, it's the amount of inches of change between years, in absolute change in the amount of precipitation. And that trend line there is statistically significant. Basically, volatility is on the rise, which means bigger swings between years. And you've heard a lot in recent years of the term precipitation whiplash or climate whiplash. These dots on here show you that. These are the years where there's been a really big shift from either a very dry year to a very wet year, those are marked in blue, or a very wet year to a very dry year, those are marked in orange. And you can see that we didn't have a whole lot of whiplash back before 1980, 6% of all years. Whiplash years in the period since 1980, over 20%. And in the last decade, I think it's more than half, actually. So whiplash is real, and it's probably here to stay. So you're not crazy for thinking the weather is getting crazier. And this past year was crazy in other ways too. So this was a whiplash year for sure. And kind of summarizing the calendar just in five sort of bullets gives you a sense of not only the year-to-year swings, but also sort of what's going on within the year. So we had this conference back in November last year. Everybody was expecting that we were going to be entering a fourth year of severe drought. That was what all of the seasonal forecasts were projecting, and La Nina conditions and such. And it was very dry. It was very dry until the last week in December, where basically it started raining and didn't stop raining for 3 weeks. We got 9 major atmospheric rivers in that time. Winter in 3 weeks, there were places that got as much precipitation as they normally get in the entire wet season. Led to widespread flooding and just extreme storms, power outages, the works. And then it got dry. And it got dry, and it stayed dry, and the forecasts were not showing rain coming, and that got water managers really anxious because we had just experienced a season like that, a year like that, the year before, where we got an epic December 2021, and then it was basically dry for the first few months of 2022, and it was continuing drought conditions. And at that point, neither of our major reservoirs were doing so great. Shasta and Oroville were both, those specific watersheds hadn't really benefited a whole lot from the precip, so there was a lot of anxiety. And then started raining again. The skies opened and we got epic snowpack. It was cold late season storms, thankfully cold, because things could have been much worse if it had not been cold in terms of the flooding. But this was when we did see Tulare Lake refill for the first time since 1997. And then we had a summer surprise, very warm summer, but then a tropical storm that hit the remnants of Hurricane Hillary and causing a lot of flood damage again, this time in Southern California and in the desert. So how did we do with all of this water? On the storage side first, good news is that we're starting this year with reservoirs pretty full. The reservoirs filled pretty quickly. The March storms in particular kind of helped catch up even in the bigger reservoirs. A lot of new efforts on groundwater recharge, especially in the San Joaquin Valley, where there's a lot of concern about groundwater overdraft. And there were some novel attempts to try to pair flood management and groundwater recharge, which were helped by executive orders from the Newsom administration to allow folks without a permit under certain conditions to divert flood flows for recharge. The pressure points, though, this is where it's always helpful to sort of see how that's going when you have the weather that you're trying to manage. Insufficient opportunities for storage south of the Delta. So Delta exports could have been much higher. We estimate at least 600,000 acre feet more could have been taken under current regulations had there been a place to put it. Incomplete preparation for recharge. Folks were kind of scrambling on the permitting side, on the issue of just finding landowners that were willing to take the water or able to take it. Unrealized potential to improve community wells. There's sort of early conversations and early pilots about that, about recharging in places that'll help with dry wells and low wells in community served areas. And then a lack of sort of strategic attention on storing water for the environment, which is really key in dry years too. Managing floods, how did we do? I don't want to say we were lucky, but it could have been much worse. And we did experience in California nearly 24 deaths, a lot in property damages, 4.6 billion and counting. The timing of storms and the temperature helped a lot in preventing it from being way worse. And so did coordination. There was really a shout out to DWR, Department of Water Resources, on this for really kind of coordinating all of its operations, and just a lot of work on the federal side and the local side, and use of near-term forecasts helped. So people think of the flood-informed forecast-informed reservoir operations, usually think of that as a way to kind of boost water supplies. In this case, some of the reservoir operators were using it to help manage floods. Growing challenges, though, on the flood side too. Aging, insufficient infrastructure, both old stuff that was built for mid-20th century conditions, and we have to be fixing that, as well as dealing with changing and more volatile conditions. Poor regional flood planning in some places, especially down in the Tulare Basin, where there was not coordination until really late in the game. Gaps in protection for low-income communities. This is a picture of Pajaro on the Central Coast, which flooded. Typically, the places that flooded were small, low-income rural communities. Insufficient nature-based solutions, and this is where kind of having room for rivers is going to really help our ecosystems as well as help our flood protection. And we know bigger storms are on the horizon. So how can we do a better job managing the wet years, which is going to be key for managing the dry years too on the storage side, and it's also going to just be key for keeping people and infrastructure out of harm's way. The first thing is better planning, being ready for the wet years rather than scrambling in the middle of a wet year, which is kind of what we were doing this year. And that means planning at the regional scale that takes into account both the supply and the flood management imperatives and thinking about how to use them to work on them together. Investment, and this is investment in what we like to call climate smart. We hear that a lot. I want to add in here wallet smart. We have to do this in cost-effective ways too, because the challenge is big, the numbers are big, and so we have to be smart about how we do this. Improving permitting. There are a lot of different ways in which there are efforts to do a better job of simplifying and getting things done while continuing to protect the environment, but there are ways in which we can still get better at that. And prioritizing low-income communities. This is both on the supply side and on the flood side. So thinking about them when you're thinking about the recharge projects and thinking about them when you're thinking about flood protection and reducing flood risk. And then stewarding the environment. And this is partly about storing water for the environment for the dry years, just like we store water for people and for agriculture and for the economy, but also thinking about making it easier for the environment to benefit from wet years through nature-based solutions. And now I'm very excited to hand over the stage because we're going to have some conversations with a great set of leaders about how to make this all happen. And first off, we're going to talk about floods. So I'm going to welcome my colleague Jeff Mount up to the stage, and he's going to, along with his great panel. Thank you.